what can I say? In some ways, a strategy is nothing. It's a piece of paper. It actually entirely depends on the oxygen and the life you breathe into it. It's really an aspiration for the future. So we spent, as you know, nearly a year, as you have to do with public money, and to be honest, we actually really had a fantastic time doing consultation up and down the country. And eventually out of this came a strategy which has to have the right balance of detail and yet not so much detail that you all fall asleep before you get to the substance of it. But then it's always a big challenge when you have to launch your strategy, because actually, let's face it, for us, we work in this fabulous world of film. The notion of going to the launch of a strategy is probably not high in our entertainment factor. And anyway, luckily, I think, for me, I came across this book because I was thinking, how on earth am I going to explain the theme of our strategy and how it's going to inflect everything we do over the next 5 years. And there's this amazing book. It's called Thank You for Being Late by a guy called Thomas Friedman, who is a 3-time Pulitzer winner. But his thesis is that we aren't imagining it. The world really is speeding up, and he explains in the book why, and it makes complete sense. But what's even more worrying is that it's speeding up more than we are likely to cope with. So in other words, in our world, the digital is meaning that our industries are speeding up faster than our systems and our people and our audiences are able to keep pace with, and I think that's something that we can really empathise with. But what I loved most was the subtitle of the book, which is An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Acceleration. And I thought, but that's us, isn't it? That's our strategy, really, because actually our strategy, if you've had the opportunity to read it, it's very optimistic, notwithstanding all the volatility that's happening out there in the world. It's optimistic because I really do think that in an age of accelerations, this is the art form that is absolutely at the centre of it. You know, I think this century is going to be the century of film, television and the moving image as the art form. So in some ways, this book backed up our slightly more parochial, well, not parochial, but sort of slimmer thinking, is that we should really be focusing on the future. So the theme of our strategy is very much the future. Now, the strategy, the biggest thing that we heard when we were talking to everybody up and down the UK was that everybody said, please don't throw everything up in the air again. And I can't tell you how relieved we were, because we were so excited by so much of the work that had been going on with the partners that we were working with. And everybody agreed. So we have built upon the foundations laid by Film Forever, and the strategy is in 3 sections for those of you who haven't yet had the chance to read it. It's all about future audiences and culture. It's all about future education and skills and future filmmaking. Why is the future so relevant to us, the BFI? It's obviously really relevant to our art form, but I think it's relevant really to the BFI because if you look, we have the privilege of being a charity. We're a not-for-profit. We are just there in our hearts and our daily lives to promote the great art of film, television and the moving image. But we also have the privilege of funding with public money. And that public money is there to catalyse change. It's to enable things that wouldn't happen before. It's to take risks that commercial money wouldn't have. So I think it's absolutely right that we use all our funding and all our activity and our ability to advocate to affect change. So I think increasingly we see ourselves as the R&D, there to support great ideas, great filmmaking ideas, great creativity, great initiatives to find new ways to bring audiences to see things that perhaps they wouldn't necessarily have immediately selected to view. So that's why the future, I think, is a good theme for us. So that's it in a nutshell. I think some of you will have read it, and I'm not going to run through all the initiatives we're doing because it would take another 10 to 15 minutes. And I'm really keen to get to your questions for those of you that have read it. If the questions flag, I'll chuck in the odd thing we're doing to see if that stimulates any more thinking. So, feeling very lonely down here all by myself. How about a good question to kick off with?
Hello, Adam from Quad. Just a quick question, I suppose, about there seems to be a closer alignment with some of the other bodies that go under DCMS, really, and particularly Arts Council. So I just wondered if you could talk a bit about what the current relationship with the Arts Council is and how some of the things that are mentioned in strategy, but also just general conversations that are going on might further align those priorities that DCMS and others above have?
Okay, Adam, thanks. That's a really good question to start with. So the three strong strategic commitments we make in the strategy towards the future are, the first one is that we say that the future of film is about the future of filmmaking and shouldn't necessarily be wedded to a platform. So we think this is one of the big changes that we're going to be doing going forward, particularly in our funding of filmmakers. We're going to be saying to filmmakers, look, we don't mind if your creative idea, if it's a really exciting, really brave, really innovative piece of filmmaking that might push where that art form might go, we're probably the people you should be speaking to. So as you know, up until now, or up until the end of this financial year, we only fund works which are destined for the big screen. And now we're going to fund filmmaking that's destined for any platform that the creator chooses. So that obviously speaks to the future of our art form. We as audiences are consuming it in lots of different platforms, and I think creative people are responding by developing it so that it is an art form for whichever platform they're destining it to be. So that puts us into quite close proximity with the Arts Council. So we've got a great relationship with them. They're just sort of down the street from us, and my colleagues have been working with them because we want to make certain that the interface between our two funding bodies is really, really as clear as it possibly could be. So in the olden world, if I can call film forever the olden world, we've pretty much funded, the Arts Council stuck to film within a gallery environment where we were much more interested in the linear form. And I think now we're so close, we're trying to work out where that will be. Now, we haven't quite got to that point of definition yet, but I think we're not far away. I mean, I can imagine in the future a scenario where we even do some joint funding together within, a clearly defined scenario. The other thing is, so that was the stretching of the art form. Diversity is a massive, massive, massive thing for us going forward. Well, not just for us, I know it is for all of you as well. We made the commitment with the diversity standards. Two big things we're doing in this strategy. The first thing that we've done a massive piece of work looking at the future skills need for our industry. We've got the Work Foundation to do it, and actually the findings are quite scary. So we've actually got a skills infrastructure, and you will know that it's within exhibition as well. I mean, we have difficulty recruiting at South Bank. The infrastructure is more akin to a sort of cottage industry of the size of something that happened in the UK in the 70s, whereas now our industry is absolutely massive. So there is no professional proper progression route to get work in the industry. And again, if you're parents and you've got children who want to find their way into the industry, it's very, very difficult to identify which are the best courses and how, what's the best way to advise your young people. So we're going to be launching a really quite significant skills strategy in the spring. This strategy trails that. It's going to be entirely dependent on us getting education, the government, the Department for Education, everybody to work together. And again, we'll be working very closely with the Arts Council on that. And the most critical thing about the skills strategy is that everybody in the industry cited the lack of diversity as the most critical problem, because we are fishing continuously. This very southeast-based industry at the moment is still fishing constantly in that same pond, and it isn't bringing through the new thinking and the new voices and things. So diversity is going to be really important there. We're also going to be calling on all UK productions to start to think about using the diversity standards. So I think our aspiration is that within 5 years we'll get to a position where it will be easy for all productions in the UK to adopt diversity standards. And then, of course, the last emphasis in the strategy, which is very Arts Council again. So the last inflection, which I think, again, we will work very closely with the Arts Council on, is we're going to try and do even more, and I think you all here will have picked up on this, to pass responsibility and more decision-making for funding out of London. So the Arts Councils, just their lottery funding is 5 times ours, so they're much bigger, so they can afford, if you like, to have a slightly more substantive organisational infrastructure outside London. We don't want to do that because we don't want to waste money, or we want to minimise the amount of money that goes on admin and infrastructure if we possibly can. So the model, as you know, we've been working on in Film Forever is to particularly work with the Film Audience Network, and in this next era we're hoping to pass more funding decision and responsibility to them. So, sorry, short question, long answer. Thank you, Adam.
Sylvia Harvey from Leeds and from Sheffield. One welcome development and one worrying development. The welcome one concerns, in my opinion, the shift in educational policy from after-school film clubs that don't involve teachers to the notion of education in the classroom, which does involve teachers. And that seems to me to be a very welcome shift, and it'd be good to hear a little bit more about that, perhaps. But the worrying development is, in my view, over the last 5 years, the BFI has done an awful lot post-UK Film Council to demonstrate its commitment to the regions, the English regions and the nations, of course, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. But my concern in particular here is the English regions and the proposal to reduce the number of regional hubs from 6 to 5. And in particular, I think, although I'm not sure where I've seen this, and maybe I've imagined it, the proposal to combine the great northwest region, where Manchester is the great city, hub of the Industrial Revolution, with the northern region to create the 5 as opposed to 6 regions. So that is my concern about the BFI's reputation in relationship to its regional policy.
Thanks, Sylvia. Well, I think I should start off by saying, as a Leeds girl, I'm not sure I would 100% agree with you, but we won't have a cross-Pennine argument about Leeds and Manchester. Sorry, that was meant to be a joke if you come from Manchester. Pathetic, but there we are. Really useful questions, because it gives an opportunity to pull out some of the things that's in the strategy. So just starting with education. Interfilm is a fantastic organisation because it's in 10,000 schools, and that means there are 10,000 volunteers. And we know from the research that we did towards the back end of Film Forever is that these are active clubs. So there are many more that were signed up, but we obviously are mainly interested in the active clubs. And obviously it sort of goes up and down as teachers move on and go to different schools, but nearly 10,000 film clubs. So that means we've got 10,000 willing volunteer teachers who are taking time out beyond their school day to stay behind and to show films to young people, which I think is great. Because we believe in our hearts that actually the way that you ignite in a young person's mind a love of film is that they need to really, really enjoy it. So I think there is real strength in doing something outside the classroom. As I shouldn't be the only thing by any means, but I think it's a really, really powerful thing. I mean, one thing with Interfilm, we've asked them to look at doing 3 things in the next era. One is that we want to work with them to make those 10,000 volunteers feel like the absolute heroes of the piece. And part of that will be them working much closer with the Film Audience Network. And I know that Paul Reeve, who runs Interfilm, is already, I think, sitting on the fan board. Because if we've got 10,000 volunteers, we must be able to do more with them. And I would just love to make them feel like they're a really important part of this. The second thing is that we've asked them to look at a more curated offer. So at the moment, one of the strengths of Interfilm is it's a very, very broad offer. And obviously, our funding is there to try and encourage people to be a little bit more culturally curious. And of course, with young people, it's a mix, isn't it? Because you have to sort of draw them in. Well, you know, because you know more about programming than I do. And then the third thing is that we want them to work much more actively with us. And with you and with these 10,000 volunteers on a manifesto for the arts and film within the classroom. So I think this is an argument you all know really, really well, but there is a real political commitment to the STEM subjects. In other words, the arts are being reduced within the classroom. And we all know that the arts have absolutely got to be in there, not just because it makes more rounded citizens, it gives you a much greater enjoyment of your own life, but also because within the arena that we work in, if you just talk to anybody, for example, working in visual effects, and they will tell you that they cannot recruit the skills that they need because we separate our young people, I think at the age of 14, between the arts and the sciences, and you really need people who combine the both. So we're going to work with them on this manifesto to, well, almost certainly I would imagine with the Arts Council, by the way, to really try and egg up the economic importance, because I think this is how government will listen to us, of getting film used much more, and not as instrumentally. We want people to learn about film as an art form, not just to learn about the battle of somewhere by watching a film, although sometimes that can be good too. So that's the education policy. In terms of the Film Audience Network, I think it's been one of the great joys of Film Forever, because it was the first policy that put audiences first. And I know, because I'd been arguing till I was blue in the face for the 10 years previously, that we were making an enormous mistake. There was absolutely no point in investing in great British filmmakers if we weren't really working with the people predominantly out in the regions who knew how to build audiences for non-mainstream fare. And I think over that period we saw, a diminution, very long word, diminution in funding, particularly to the not-for-profit and cultural cinemas around the country. So it was a great joy, really, in Film Forever to be able to start to correct that and to start to put some funding in alongside the Arts Council, and to try and develop this, this notion of a film audience network. And I'm completely aware that members of it entered into it with good faith, but I know, because you've told me quite candidly, that there was a lot of scepticism as to whether collectively it could become critically more than the sum of its parts. And it definitely is. And it's been really great to see it take on its own life and start to decide things for itself. We've lost sound again, but never mind. Can you hear me? Oh, yes, sorry. It's very strange mic, this, actually. So my understanding, and I haven't been involved massively in it, is that there is a fan board, and we very much devolve, and I know I've got BFI colleagues in that, so we very much devolve thinking to that board. One of the challenges that we've had is that there were obviously very strong existing centres, but we did find that in Birmingham in particular, there wasn't a natural home to kick off in the first place, and so it meant that there was a hub in the northwest and a hub in the southwest who were attempting to spread themselves over that great distance, which geographically doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think there absolutely is a commitment to look at, as we'd say in politics lands, of redrawing the boundaries. But I think the way of doing that is going to be led by the fan itself. The other thing, which I'm sure you know, but just as a reminder, one of the I suppose it's a good thing with lottery funds, is that we have to create guidelines and you have to apply for them. We can't just say it's you. And therefore we have to draw up those guidelines. And so it does mean that for people who are in receipt of lottery money, we can't just automatically renew that once that particular scheme's come to an end. So my expectation is that, number one, is that the guidelines will allow the good work that's happening to go on. We've absolutely committed more money to the fan. We've committed to pass much more responsibility and decision making to the fan, and that includes, I think, a bit how they structure themselves within the context of the funds that we've got available.
The question I was going to ask you is that, having skim-read the strategy last night, there was a line in it talking about building on the BFI Film Academy programme and professionalising it more. And I wasn't that word was quite an interesting one for me, because I think there's some very good practice in the Film Academy network. So it's not a massive strategy thing, but in terms of joining up with the rest of the talent development thing, I'm quite interested in hearing your reflections on what that might look like.
Great, thank you. I'm glad you picked up on that. The BFI Film Academy, well, first of all, if you meet anybody from the Department for Education, can you do me a favour and give them a big hug and tell them that they absolutely must continue to fund the Film Academy. We've run it for 4 or 5 years now. It's really, really working. We're starting to see young people from really diverse backgrounds, young people who would never have even started to aspire to or imagined that they could find a career in the industry. However, if you run 64 courses across the whole of the UK, it's really important that the quality that we deliver is the best it can possibly be. So really, it was throwing down the gauntlet to the industry and the professionals to get more involved with the Film Academy. Now, one of our governors, great producer called Matthew, oh Lord, I can't remember his surname now. Justice, thank you. Oh, Lord. Matthew Justice runs Big Talk. He will have finished doing his 6 years on the board of the BFI, and he's going to take the BFI Academy as his great passion at the end when he steps down. And he's going to really work to get the industry much, much more involved in it. So it was really about saying, it's nothing to do, it wasn't meant to be anything negative about the way that they're run at the moment, because they're fantastically run and we get consistently good reports. But we need the real, successful industry folk to give up a portion of their time in between films and give back. And they can give back through the Film Academy. So that was the word professionalise.
Hi, my name is Shona Thompson. I'm an independent creative producer and curator based in Edinburgh. And I mean, one of the good things that I've found in the last few years about the Film Audience Network, Film Hub Scotland, and the Britain on Film programme is the chance to collaborate UK-wide, so collaborate with Scottish folk, but also with meeting colleagues like we have at this conference. It's great to know that there's other folk out there and to be able to collaborate. Is there any plans for that more UK-wide kind of initiatives, funding, sort of programmes that we can maybe look out for?
Thank you. I think the rationale behind the FAN was to fund something and let it take on its own life and let people who know what they're doing get on with it. And what has been very rewarding is to see some of the big cultural programmes that have been, to be honest, brought alive through the really imaginative curation that has popped up all around the country. So, for example, you take Black Star. So, the BFI does something, but then we provide the funding. It's a sort of motivational catalyst funding. And the way that programme has been taken and developed around the UK in a way which speaks to the audience knowledge that the curators and the programmers have on the ground, I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think if I was to say what would success look like for me in 5 years' time at the end of this, would be many more of those, but more of them being not born, this is very bad English, not born from the BFI. So it would be great to see us, and I'm sure this will happen, more UK-wide projects that come out of the FAN.
Hi, I understand, Sue and I run Dunlop Community Cinema, and I was just wondering, I understand there's no reference to community in the policy, so, and obviously there's a huge movement, and I think it's increasing quite significantly, the number of community cinemas, and they obviously promote a lot of independent and foreign and British films, so I was just wondering, it's a bit concerning that it hasn't been referenced, and I was wondering what the BFI's approach to that will be.
Thank you very much. Well, you might be the first person to have spotted a mistake in the strategy, and I'm glad it's an online one. We had as you're absolutely right, we had a dedicated fund in the first 5 years called Neighbourhood Cinema, and that was a small capital fund to try and enable neighbourhood cinemas to just upgrade, fairly basic facilities within those to enable these to continue. What we're going to concentrate on now is giving much greater support to the programming within those, and hopefully again through the FAN. So as we pass more responsibility and funding decisions to the FAN, we're hoping that sort of partnership model will be decided by them. What we have done is we've put all the audience funds together. So what traditionally before was, I think, the programme development funds, the funding for the FAN, and also what was known as the P&A funding, the funding that went to distributors to help them release their films. We're interested in that sector working much more closely together. So it is one fund. And the word community should definitely have been in there, and if it isn't in there, I can only apologise. We need to go back and put it in there because they're really important. We are definitely continuing to fund Cinema for All, so that commitment is totally sustained.
I mean, if anything, we'd be interested. What's the... I'm having a real problem with my brain today. It's after 2 days of presentations. The rent track figures. I think the rent track's missing a trick here because they often don't capture the full box office, as you know. So I think this is something that we will be quite interested in them looking at. I'm looking at Richard, and he's nodding furiously. And we will go back and put the word community in because it should be.
Yeah, Neil from Tape Community Music and Film in sunny North Wales, normally not in the dark. We've just taken on BFI Film Academy status, and we're delivering our first course in January, which is very exciting. But obviously, talking about linking in with more professionals, do you see that as representing an opportunity for us as a community film organisation, or is it something that will kind of mean that the opportunity to continue that will be taken away from us down the line?
Absolutely no way. Congratulations, really brilliant. Thank you so much for, thank you for, taking on the challenge and the energy to do it. And I'm thrilled we've managed to support you. Quite the opposite. What we say is, great for you, and let's work together and just make sure that you can get as many active filmmakers as possible coming along to work with you and your students. And you're absolutely right, it's the link potentially through to the community cinema as well would be really, really good. I mean, the one thing we do know, and I think we don't, I'm looking at Richard, I don't think we join up enough. Obviously, we fund a lot of films, and they're usually shooting all over the UK. And actually, we ought to do more to try and link. I mean, I don't know what we've got shooting in North Wales, but presumably Film Cymru would know. That would be an obvious way of trying to link through. Do you work with Film Cymru or the Welsh Government? So, they might also know, and also the production services run out of the Welsh Government. They would also know what's shooting, both in terms of film and television in your area. And again, linking through to the British Film Commission and Creative England, who we fund, who also do production services. So you might get a film that's coming into this country, or a British film, but might be location shooting in your area, and it might be good to make the contact there. So I think there's a germ of an idea there, isn't there? I'm looking at Richard for total comfort, and we'll do it. There we are. We're going to do that. More films shooting in Wales, coming to the Film Academy. Sounds a good plan. That's a good idea, thank you.
It's an easy question. I think you were quoted on the screen earlier saying you wanted to increase engagement for 16 to 30-year-olds with art house cinema. So I just wondered if you could expand on that.
Yes, so this is our big leap in the dark, really, literally, because when you're doing a strategy, you start to think about how do you start to move the dial. And the BFI, hopefully, we're quite modest. We understand that we're really quite a small cog in a much bigger industry. So our job is to just get that little cog going in somewhere and hope it'll start to move the bigger cogs. So what do we know? Well, you know this better than I do because this is your daily life. But 16 to 30-year-olds are avid consumers of film, and even more so in the digital world, online. If you look at the online arena, actually it's going the same way as cinemas. We're finding that mainstream film is dominating there, and most of the commercial models are dependent on that mainstream scenario, which is obviously why we invented the BFI player, to make sure that there was at least one or two other non-totally mainstream players in the market. So I think the thinking was quite simple, and I'm hoping this will be something that we can all start to get our head round, is if we know we've got this captive audience, if we know that this is an audience which probably has, sorry, I don't know the age of all of you in the audience, but looking at Bill and I, this is the audience age, which actually is much more conversant with the notion of film being central to their daily lives. And if we've already got them captive, what do we need to do to encourage them to be more culturally adventurous? And I think I wasn't here for the previous workshop because I was stuck on a train outside Lancaster, but I think that Richard probably outlined just this tiny little thing we did at BFI Southbank. Richard, did you? Yeah. So from that we learnt that actually price, can be quite a barrier. So I think the idea was, well, we know the audience is there, we know they love film, we know that they're prepared to spend their money on it and spend their time on it. So what could we do to get them to just shift a bit into more culturally adventurous territory? So with the Audience Fund, what we've really put in the strategy is that we are going to be asking for people who have mad, bad, crazy ideas that they want to pilot, and we will help to fund that and de-risk those ideas, providing that the data and everything is shared across the piece. I think the other thing is in Film Forever, the initial idea with the Film Audience Network was that there would be a lot of coziness between the commercial sector and the not-for-profit sector, and that didn't really work. I think everybody intended it to, and the commercial cinemas were very keen. They didn't want to be excluded from it. But the truth of the matter is that most of them are programmed centrally for very different reasons. So it just sort of didn't work, but they're still keen to be in there somehow playing their part. So I think we're hoping that this might be an arena where partnerships might be possible, because as we know, those 16 to 30-year-olds, they do tend to go and watch more mainstream cinema. So perhaps there might be some joint things that could be possible there. But like any strategy, it's a strategy. The figures are right. The strategic thinking is right. All we've got to do is just, take it to the next step of doing. So there's a bit of money there to do it. Other gentleman at the top. Need some warm women putting up their hands, please.
Hi, yeah, sorry about that. Steve from Broadway in Nottingham. There's mention in the strategy about talent development and more production activity away from London and the South East. And I just wondered how you were going to achieve that.
Okay. So it comes from a vision of so Britain is one of the great centres, I think, critically creatively for film at the moment. I think our filmmakers are doing things that are really making the world think, and we're also a huge destination for films to come and be made here, because we've got great skills, great infrastructure, we've got a great reputation for getting the job done, so we're low risk, and obviously we've got really good tax incentives. They're not the best in the world, but they're good enough with the others to make us very strong. But then if you look at where all of that activity happens, I don't need to tell you, it's predominantly in London and the South East. So quite apart from what might be right, because obviously you don't want a nation where we're squandering, I would say, half of the talent, the rest of the talent that exists around the country. But also economically, you have to have a vision that in 10 years' time, there are going to be other international centres of real importance alongside London if we get to cope with and aspire to the growth that we want. So in the last strategy, we launched a pilot fund. It was called a cluster growth fund. And the idea was that we could see emerging around the country centres where there was a coming together of public funding and commitment and leadership on the ground. So Manchester would be one, Yorkshire would be another, some good stuff going on in the West Midlands. And I know there's some thinking going on in Scotland, for example, about infrastructure and studios. So what we wanted to do was, first of all, was to offer the money for places that had the leadership to come together, and we said, well, look, we'll 50% fund your feasibility study. And we're in the process of doing this. So we've made one award to Yorkshire, and the second round is being announced today, and I have no idea who's got the money yet. I'm dying to know myself, but I know the second round of the feasibility. So that's the first rung of the ladder. So then the next thing is that we know two things have happened. One is that we have to assume that out of that round, we're going to get 2 or 3 places across the UK where the in-depth economic study is going to show that there's a real possibility of doing something, quite significant. And then the second thing that's happened, of course, we've all voted to exit the EU, and sadly, almost certainly with it is going to go the ERDF funding, which has been really important in terms of encouraging production outside London, the West Midlands Fund and the Yorkshire Fund. So our thinking was very simply that what we would do is we would use some of our production funding to support new production funds in some of the regions which can demonstrate leadership and a commitment to match this, to incentivise it. and for those funds to be used in such a way that they would be not hard money. The ERDF money was quite hard, the terms were hard, so our money could be softer for producers. But there would be requirements about using regional skill, regional infrastructure, all those sorts of things, so you start to get a critical mass and stickiness build up, economically. So that's the thinking, really. And we have estimated that if we can get this going, 25% of our production funding, decision-making will happen outside of London by 2022. So it's identify the centres and then get the funds into those centres to help them work.
Chris Purser from the Ritz Cinema in Thirsk in Yorkshire. We're very heartened by the amount of filmmaking activity, professional filmmaking activity that's going on in Yorkshire. Funding is one thing, and I can remember Shirley Williams many years saying funding is a mug's game, because any country that come up with a fund package, and any other country can immediately bid up to it or exceed it. The important thing is trained manpower. So is there an incentive to, is there an initiative to tie up the fact that we've got all this activity in Yorkshire with the institutes of education and higher education in the county to make sure that this feeds back into the skills base?
The answer is yes, but no, I mean, the BFI can't lead it directly. We will fund where there is the commitment to do that. So Yorkshire is a good example. I'm sorry to use it, but it's a strong example here where little things start to come together and work. So in Yorkshire, you've got the local enterprise partnerships, you've got the universities, you've got fantastic facilities there. University of York, you've got Bradford, which is very good in the digital arena, and also got a lot of what I would call the practical skills, because filmmaking is, chippies and makeup artists and caterers and all of that as well. So they are all very committed to working together collectively. So the point of the feasibility study isn't to prove anything to anybody other than themselves. Look, this is a real growth industry. I mean, just in the last quarter in the UK, astonishingly, the growth for the film and television industries was 16.4% in the last quarter. For the economy as a whole, it was 0.5%. So, of course, that's not going to happen the whole year round, but it's a colossal arena for growth. And a lot of people, you will all know this, but it's worth reminding ourselves, is that every film needs an army of people behind it. So everybody out there knows about producers and directors, but actually the majority of people on any film have got really strong practical skills, which are very portable, both inside and out of the industry itself. So it's a really strong employer. But you're absolutely right. If you don't get the critical mass, if you haven't got a strategic decision on a regional basis to build the economic case, if you don't have the LEPs behind it, the city councils behind it, the universities behind it, then it's not going to work. And Yorkshire's been really good because I think they've done that. I mean, they started off with Screen Yorkshire, getting a bit of ERDF money, attracting some projects in, and it grew and it grew. They were clever in the way they invested the money. They tailgated some of the other big productions, and now they've got enough confidence locally to have, got the rights on Church Fenton. Just had Victoria filming there, and I think there's a second series coming. But our skills strategy also speaks to the point that you're talking about, because notwithstanding doing all of that, if the national skills infrastructure for our industries is non-existent, so just take media studies, for example. So here's the good thing about media studies. Media studies is in the top 5 studies for employability at the end. What it isn't good at is getting people into the industry. So if you strip out media studies, we've only got about 6,000 students a year studying practical skills for the industry, and we need a hell of a lot more than that to deal with what we're doing. Second thing is, if you're a producer, I don't know how many producers there are here, and you need an electrician, you will pay the same price per hour for an electrician who's had 25 years experience in the industry or 5 minutes experience. There's no sense of progression. So it's a sort of very non-professional, fragmented framework for skills, but there's enough money out there to sort it. It's already, in the in the education infrastructure. The last thing on skills is that every business which has an employment, salaries bill of over 3 million, and a lot of the TV companies do, they're going to be paying the apprenticeship levy. That's like a tax that you can only get back if you employ the apprentices to put them on courses that are valid for your business. If those courses don't exist, you're just going to be paying that levy and not getting any of the benefit back. So there's a real importance to get the whole strategy thing sorted.
Emma Mortimer from the Hippodrome Festival of Silent Cinema, just down the road in Bowness. Because I've been here, I've only had a chance to skim read the strategy, so I apologise if the answer is glaringly obvious in there, but I just wondered if there is any information about the Film Festival Fund.
Please don't apologise. You'd have to have a really boring time to sit down and read the whole strategy. So that's absolutely fine. The Film Festival Fund, it's all amalgamated now into one audience fund, and we've done that deliberately because it might be one year the bids in for festivals are much more exciting than some of the other things, and we didn't want to be curtailed any which way. So there is still the absolute commitment to fund festivals. It's a great festival you do, by the way. Obviously, it's very close to our heart.
Hi, I'm Melanie from Sheffield Doc Fest. Hi, Amanda. We've just had a panel session on storytelling through new technologies, and again, like Emma, I'm afraid I've only skim-read the strategy so far. But my question is, I know that it does say that you will be embracing, film across all platforms, and so I wondered what that might mean for interactive and virtual reality film in terms of exhibition and production.
So let me tell you a story. One of the reasons that I've got a really practical. I can't think of a way of saying this. We funded a film called Notes on Blindness, which most of you in the room will know really well. What we were not able to fund under our guidelines at that stage was the virtual reality filmmaking that went with it, and it was a fantastic opportunity to get behind somebody who was going to push this great art of filmmaking across all platforms. When the BFI was invented way back in 1933, you could only see a film on the big screen. And yet, we've managed to adapt all the way through. So the answer is, if Ben Roberts was here, he'd say, look, we just want to get behind great filmmaking. So if that filmmaker wants to do it for VR, and indeed the VR community are crying out to find some way to develop their own moving image grammar so that it's an art of. So the answer is, I think we're really excited about opening up the funds to allow creative people, filmmakers, to just expand their mind a bit. Hands up who's read the strategy. No, come on, you must have read. Anyway, anybody who's read the strategy gets a cold chocolate coin. Thank you very much, Richard.